And I want to introduce our guest tonight. Tonight we have with us Dr. Joy Lawson Davis. She is going to chat with us tonight in kind of a casual conversation. She's going to share some information, also answer some questions. So absolutely, as you are logging in, feel free to pop your questions for Joy in the comments section on this live stream. She's going to talk to us tonight about equity and access and gifted education, a field in which we all look to Joy for information and advice and insight. Just a brief little bit about Joy. She is an award-winning author and scholar and a professional learning trainer. I've seen her speak on multiple occasions and taken rigorous notes every time. She's a researcher and a practitioner in the field of gifted education. Her area of expertise is addressing equity and access in gifted education programs, as I stated, with a particular focus on the needs of Black gifted students and their families. She holds 2 degrees from the College of William and Mary and has provided training for educators and parents across the nation and internationally, including places like South Africa, the Caribbean, Dubai, Turkey, around the world. She's seen some really cool places, I'm sure. She's a former associate professor, chair, and Department of Teacher Education at Virginia Union University, where she taught undergraduate and graduate work in teacher education and urban education as an assistant professor. The School of Education at the University of Louisiana, Lafayette, where she taught undergraduate and graduate coursework in teacher education and gifted education. So she's taught and practiced and worked with children and worked with families all across the country and the world. She's spent 5 years in the Virginia Department of Education and was a founding executive director of the Appomattox Regional, I always worry about pronouncing that properly, Regional Governor's School for Arts and Tech, a high school for gifted students. She has written 2 books, go out and get them now, Bright, Talented, and Black, a guide for families of African-American gifted learners, as well as gifted children of color around the world, diverse needs, exemplary practices, and directions for the future. So she's also on the board of trustees for the Roper School. So Anne Marie Roper's namesake school for gifted in Michigan. So Joy, your accolades are many, and we are so excited to have you on tonight to talk about a topic that is so important right now and has been important for a really long time. And I'm hoping that all the research and information that you have been providing and the stuff you've been preaching for years, we really start to kind of make some strides and learn from what you have to share. So I'm going to go ahead and let you say hello to everybody.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you for your Tuesday evening conversation. I was scheduled early on, and things got real busy in our virtual world of trying to reach out and trying to respond to so many requests that have come in around this issue of equity and access in gifted ed. And I'm excited about the new concerns, the new energy that I think have come about. I'm kind of sad about the fact that some of this came about as a result of tragedy in the Black community in particular. However, the motivation to move people has been meaningful, I think, and purposeful. And I am just really glad to do the work and continue to do this work and work with my colleagues across different organizations. And I urge colleagues, the group of Black scholars who have now joined together, and we've taken this on as something that we're all going to work on together. And again, I'm just very, very excited to come. It's holiday time. Holiday is approaching us, and so we'll take a little break. Actually, I believe, Randy, this is probably my last. Yes, it is. This is my last virtual workshop conversation for the year. So after this one, I have to settle down some because I've got a great deal of writing to do to try to get caught up on some great projects. And I'll share that with you before we finish up for tonight.
Awesome. We have quite a few people watching right now, and they're all excited to hear you. So I think, Joy, that we'll start with a question, and then I hopefully this question will open up and allow you to share some of the information that you have to share tonight. So the first question is a question from actually a member of CAGT, Teresa Newsom. She's also been on conversations with CAGT previously this year. And she has posed the question, what does equity in a GT program / classroom look like?
So in response, okay, let's see if I can get my my slides up here that I haven't, if I haven't ruined it. Let me go back. In response to the initial question, I think is I like to kind of start with what our data looks like, but I had to show this fabulous slide here first. I'm a former art teacher, so when I get a chance, I love toying around with visuals on these slides. But I wanted to show this one to you all to begin with. But just recently, I started looking at a report that came out in January of this year from the Education Trust. The Education Trust data on access and equity in gifted and AP programs is framed a little bit differently than the data that we get from the U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. And so I only looked at the data around inequities relative to Black and Latino or Latinx students. And their data doesn't really look a lot different over time. Let me say this first of all. While we have made some progress in this area, over time, we have not made the progress that we should have made because, as you see from the numbers here, and I'll read through this chart in just a moment, Black students and Latinx students in particular are still underrepresented in gifted programs in across the country, and they're still underrepresented in AP and advanced learner programs. Now, we all know that students do not necessarily have to be identified as gifted in order to take or in order to have access to AP. But generally, in many of our schools, that's where our kids end up. So let's look at this, the second row here. First of all, for those students, for schools that actually offer, the ones who reported, I should say, in their general population, we're talking about now the GATE programming at the elementary level. In the population of those particular schools, 16% of the students in those schools in total are African American or Black. However, only 9%, the representation in GATE programming at the elementary level is of Black students is only 9%. So as we see that number, that shows us that there's an underrepresentation of these same students or the same population group in elementary programming across the nation. For the Latino students, the numbers appear to be a little better, but we still see an underrepresentation of Latino students, 24% in the general population, 18% in the GATE population, gifted and talented education programming. And then as we go further down the chart, we see that for AP, and these numbers are combined here. We're talking here about AP courses, dual enrollment, any other types of high-end coursework that are specified in this particular report, like honors and even IB. 15% of the schools that reported had 15% Black students, and of that group of students in those particular programs, only 9% Black. Latinx, on the other hand, there was 25%, and in those AP, honors, dual enrollment, IB programs, only 21% of the population is Latino. So we still see, and so in answer to Teresa's question, we see that there's such inequity within these two population groups in particular. And as we dig a little deeper into the data, we also know that low-income students across population groups have less access to gifted programs. We also know that students who come from Native American populations have less access to gifted and advanced learner programs across the country. These numbers are seriously disturbing to me. They're very disturbing. It shows us, it tells us that no matter what we've done, here we are in 2020 with all the work that we've done in this area and trying to reach equity, trying to inform and trying to teach about equity and advocating for equity, we still see that we are not identifying and serving students who are African American and Latino to the same at the same level as we are other students. And we also know that in our programs, for the most part, white students and Asian students are overrepresented in these programs. So, what does equity look like, Teresa, and the rest of the group that are listening? Equity looks like demographically representative programming. When we look into a gifted classroom and we see the students in that classroom are representative of the same demographic groups that are in that particular school. And then as we look at the larger picture, that the school system itself has programming that has been made available, made accessible, made equitable to all students who deserve to be in those programs, who qualify for those programs, have the skill set, already have the skill set that's necessary in order to be successful in gifted and talented programming. And then, of course, as we move through middle school on into high school, into these AP and these higher end courses at the secondary level, what do these programs do for students? It prepares them for competitive, high end university experiences. It prepares them for scholarships. It prepares them. And so the sooner we get students into gifted programs in a more equitable way at the elementary level, the better chances they'll have of being successful as they move through our school programs. Students who go into GATE programming early stand a better chance of going into dual enrollment programs and some into early college. We're hearing a lot more now about students who are qualifying for early college programming, and they are doing that because they have been exposed to high-end instruction early and in a sustained way. Without early and high-end early exposure to high-end instruction, they don't have a chance necessarily to be successful because they haven't been exposed to that type of curricular materials. It doesn't mean that they are not capable. It means that they don't have access. The capabilities of our students is not the same thing as access. Access means that they have had doors open and the barriers removed that keep students out of programs. So I know I went a long way with that particular question, but I had to make sure we get that information out front. We're talking here about access to programming for students who have the skill set and are capable, but they don't have access. And without access, they cannot excel and succeed the way they should in our schools.
And you mentioned as part of that, and that's kind of another question that was brought up by another CAGT member. You mentioned in that about identification early. You said the sooner we ID, the better, high in instruction early and in a sustained way. And Maddie from the Rise Up community.
Absolutely.
She asked kind of a lead in, I mean, it was a similar question. Maybe you could expound on that a little bit because her question is a little more nuanced. How do we change the system to recognize our Black and Brown students earlier than later? So you want to recognize them, but she thinks there's a systemic issue in place.
There absolutely is a systemic issue in place. Let me go to the next slide and kind of look at what some of these systemic barriers are to equity and access. Some of the barriers are our behaviors and belief systems, our discriminatory behaviors and belief system about what giftedness is and what a high ability student looks like. And those behaviors lead to students being shut out from programming. We know that there's great research that tells us that when Black students who have the same ability scores as white students in their particular grade level or group do not have the ability to be identified or referred for gifted programs. As a matter of fact, they're 6 times less likely to be referred for a gifted program by teachers who don't believe in them, by teachers who don't know that what they're capable of is the same as any other student is. So those discriminatory behaviors have to go. We have to rid our schools as best we can, as soon as we can, of people who don't believe in giftedness, that giftedness has no boundaries, that gifted children, who don't believe that gifted children exist in all families, in all types of families, in all types of neighborhoods. When we have people in the schools that don't believe in these children, that's one of the first barriers that we have to overcome. The schools that they attend with limited resources, poorly trained teachers, lack of specialized programming, funding for specialized program is critically important. And then that we focus more attention in our schools on what students can't do, the deficit view, the deficit base, rather than what they can do. So we don't have in these particular schools as many opportunities for competitive programming, for competitive games, for engaging in high level STEM programming, or opportunities for students to engage with specialists from many different areas. These racist belief systems that govern our schools keep our students from being identified early on. We know that when students again are exposed to high-end instruction, critical thinking skills instruction, creative instruction, are able to go through the curriculum programs, or through are able to be grade skipped when they need to be, accelerated when they need to be. When they have that access in early childhood, and that access is sustained throughout their school experience, then we know that those students stand a much better chance of being successful in their particular areas of interest. They also stand a better chance of discovering what their interests are. If they don't have the access to certain types of instruction, they'll never know. They don't have access, for example, to someone who is deeply interested in science and in archaeology and architecture. So suppose this kid was really thinking about wanting to be a scientist, but then they discover through a specialized program that they have other kinds of skills, that they have other kinds of interests, but they'll never have an opportunity to spark that interest unless they've been involved in these specialized programs. Early and sustained instruction, early and sustained access is critical for students, particularly students who would not have access because they are students of color, or students who come from low income backgrounds and their parents don't have the means to provide the specialized support for them. It's the school's responsibility to provide for students to excel and to move through programming in the way that they are able to do. It's the school's responsibilities. And so we can't have two different schooling systems. And that's what we have here in America. We have one system that is set up to allow persons to excel based on how much money their parents have and who their parents are. And then we have another system where we give just what they actually, not even what those kids need, but we give the minimal to these particular students, and we teach them again based on not what they know, but what they don't know. And we move them through. These are persistent and systemic barriers to access. And until we can rid ourselves of these types of barriers, recognize it, first of all, that we have these barriers and that we have belief systems, people who just don't believe. And I've worked with folks like that. I had a really awful experience in one situation where I came in to do some training with teachers. And I had a couple of experiences, but I'll share this one with you, where a classroom teacher was very perturbed. That's a nice way of putting it. That in her school they had identified through a talent search program, through a pilot program, a large number of Black boys who were second and third graders. And those boys were found eligible for gifted services because they were looking for students who had spatial, gifts, who had, who were visually, spatially gifted. Put these students into this particular program where they could excel if the teachers were willing and able to work with them based on their spatial giftedness. And we know that we need spatially gifted people. There are architects, there are, they're the people who design bridges. They're the ones who work to put together things. They're the computer scientists. This particular teacher actually asked me if I could do something. And when she says something, she means if I could speak to the administration about getting those visually, spatially gifted boys out of their school, getting them out of the school, which was just horrendous to me. So I handled myself quite well, Randy. I just stopped for a moment, took a deep breath, and then I asked her, I said, did you happen to go across a bridge in the last 7 days? And I knew the area she lived in. There are lots of bridges and tunnels. I knew that. And she said, sure. And I said, so how about, I guess you live in a house, don't you? And she realized I was going to be sarcastic. My response was going to be sarcastic. And you driving a car, right? And she said, yes. I said, well, you can thank a visual, spatially gifted person for providing all of those services for you. Without them, we don't have much of a world to live in. The visual spatial person is the one who designed that bridge. The visual special person is the one who designed that car you get in every day. And of course, that person also designed the home that you live in. So you need to rethink what you know about or what you think you know about visual spatially gifted people. And after that, our relationship probably wasn't the greatest, but I think she understood by then. And I hope she went and did some additional research on visual spatial giftedness. So again, attitudes and behaviors like that of people who work in gifted education is one of the greatest barriers to equity in our programming, unfortunately.
And I think you really kind of answered that question. I think sometimes, and I've been in districts and I've heard of districts where policies are not to identify until third or fourth grade or till later on. And I think that is absolutely, at that point, we are identifying access and opportunity. We're not identifying giftedness. I feel like when we let children who are gifted go for that long without services, and without recognition of their giftedness, we make it harder for us to identify them later. And so, I think in questions, there's also conversation about low resources, and a couple of the questions kind of combine. I'll just combine a couple of the questions. Maddie asked about supporting Black and Brown counselors. And I know that mental health support, psychiatrists, school psychologists, counselors, are part of our underfunding of public education, and our, we have like one psychiatrist for every 1,500 or psychologist for every 1,500 students in our district. I know it's worse in other districts.
Right.
And we also can talk about the teacher shortage, but also the shortage of diverse teachers to educate our youth.
Absolutely.
Who, especially in our communities like mine, where we're 70% Latino, teachers who have an understanding of customs and cultures and norms that, I, as a white educator, might not always be as fluent in that. And so kind of like, as far as we talk about low schools, we talk about support staff and we talk about staffing. Do you think that is a concern as well?
Oh, absolutely. Let me go back to the idea of the need for more teachers of color in gifted education, in general education, of course, but absolutely in gifted education. And we are seeing an increasing number of young people going into certification programs and degree programs. But to do this, they also need funding. So they need support from the district or from some partnership to provide tuition reimbursement or to provide specialized scholarships for them. And then they also have the dilemma, I would say, of just being a school teacher, a classroom teacher, because the salary scale for classroom teachers in general is not what it ought to be. And so if you have persons who have a skill set and they are capable of working in other fields, and they realize when these young people are in teacher education programs, for example, and they realize what the salary scales look like, many of them will shift out of teacher ed and go into another program area because they recognize that their first job, they may make $10,000 to $20,000 more in these other fields than they will in teacher education. And particularly those students who have had to struggle financially just to get this undergraduate degree. And so there are many concerns around, and ensuring that we can entice and encourage more young people to go into gifted education programs. And so if we do have more financial support, and we also have that encouragement. So we have an intentional recruiting process, recruiting and retention process. Once again, as with the students, we have to do this intentionally. We recruit students, we recruit young people into gifted education, but then we want to also do everything we can possibly do to keep them there, because the students who see them realize that the possibilities with them. And they also, as you said, Randy, which is so critically important, these young people also have a better understanding of the beliefs, the norms, the practices of their own cultural group than someone who may have the best of intentions and not understand the culture, not understand the language, not understand, what goes on in the neighborhood and in the community, not understand and not even respect. And many times, as I said about these discriminatory behaviors, don't even respect other people that come from the students that come from the culturally diverse or the minoritized. The researchers are using that terminology now. They don't respect Black kids in the same way. If you're not Black and you haven't been in a Black community, you haven't had to live, haven't lived within certain conditions, and you're a member of what we call the oppressed groups. The Latino students and Black students in particular are members of an oppressed group. And our children recognize that. They're young and they know that it's almost frightening sometimes for students to be a part, to be a Black student. I just read an article recently about a little boy who actually started a campaign, and his main emphasis, his main aim of his campaign was that he didn't want to live in fear all of his life. A bright kid, but he was afraid just to be Black. And we should not have a country that even endorses or encourages that kind of behavior from other adults. But children go to school every day because they happen to be Black or they happen to be Latino, and they're afraid. And so we need teachers standing up in front of those classrooms who support their social emotional needs, who understand the unique challenges of being bright, talented, and Black, who understand, and also the students can look at them and see, if this person was able to be successful, then I can do the same thing. They see me and they know that I give them hope in a way that perhaps other teachers would not give them hope. So yes, we do need a stronger focus, a more intentional focus on recruiting and retaining teachers of color in gifted education program. I just had a wonderful experience at NAGC with 3 young people who are award-winning teachers from North Carolina, and 2 male and 1 female. And they told their story in our session around recruiting and retaining. And I was so impressed with their work and with their candidness in telling their story, and the ideas, the suggestions they had for how school districts can recruit more people like them. I thought, wow, we need to be able to clone these 3 young people. And so I am going to do some continuing work with them to get their message out. They are the boots on the ground. They're the practitioner, and they understand why it's important for them to be where they are. One of them happens to be a father of 3 very gifted students, and he's also an award-winning teacher. He understands, in a very deep way, why it's important for there to be young men in the classroom who look like him, and can support children whose needs sometimes are not going to be met by others who don't respect, value, or understand their cultures at all. So this is a very important area of focus, equity, and access. It goes beyond identification. We have to keep that in mind. We're talking here about the teachers who teach these students, who can recognize their gifts and respect and value their gifts. We're talking about resourcing schools. We're talking about administrators who understand what it means to have a culturally responsive school, and to believe that culture is important, and to be, for some, that cultural agent. Sometimes the administrators have to be the cultural agent between the teachers and the students and the community. So this issue is important, And we do have to go deeper than just looking at identification. I was really glad to see those questions, because we do need to keep in mind the needs that we have for gifted ed, to recruit and retain more people of color in teaching positions, counseling positions, school psych positions, and administrative positions as well.
Yeah, I think across the board, and I think one of the important things as gifted, flag bearers, is to help our support staff, our administrators, and our other staff, our mental health staff, and our counselors, and our even general education teachers understand giftedness better, but also understand that giftedness comes in many ways. There's many characteristics of gifted, and those characteristics vary from student to student, from culture to culture, from low income to high income. And how do we find those kids? And I think there's a lot of great grants out there, like the Javits Grants does a lot of work. I'm fortunate enough to be involved in my second Javits Grant with regard to doing some culturally responsive education. But I think, I think it's systemic. It's not just like one little grant's going to save the world. We have to really look at our systems. So you make a lot of great points. Another question that came across, and this maybe be more related to parents, but you kind of touched on this community, and for suggestions for developing a supportive local community, especially in our underrepresented groups. Because a lot of times I think and this is my experience as well, is I think that sometimes the way school meetings tend to go isn't necessarily culturally responsive to some of our families, like the timing, the speed, the formality. So what suggestions might you have in helping maybe schools and families bridge that divide, or helping parents find resources or support locally to create community in the gifted sense?
Again, first of all, we have to change our mindset about who these parents are and what these parents can bring to the table. These parents are members of intact communities. They know their communities better than anyone who lives outside. They also know their children, and they see giftedness in their children. I have interviewed many parents. I've surveyed hundreds of parents over the years. I've included some of their stories in my work. And what I hear about when they talk about their gifted children, I hear the same gifted traits and characteristics from parents of color as I read about in my theory textbooks. They know the kids are pretty much the same when it comes to their traits and characteristics, but then there's also that cultural layer. There's also things about the culture that are different. And if the school administration, the teachers, and other individuals who are seated in that same room, as you say, at these meetings, and they don't understand and don't know and don't value the culture, then the persons who can give you more information, more legitimate information, would be those parents. And so I always recommend that, number one, that if you're going to have any kind of an advisory committee, just like with the students in the classroom, we need to have a demographically representative advisory committee. Demographically represented means that if you have 40% of the individuals of the students who go to your schools are African American, 40% of the people in that committee ought to be African American as well. And the same with Latino or any other cultural group. Demographically representative individuals seated at the table who are parents, who are community leaders, who are faith leaders, people who know these families and engage with these families on a day-to-day basis and understand and see the children in different capacities. And they know what these students are capable of, because perhaps they've known this family for generations, or they were raised up with the family, and so they have insights that we are not taking advantage of, we are not paying attention to. The other thing is that we need to teach parents what gifted education is all about. And I know I've hammered this point for the last 10 years at least. When I wrote Bright, Talented, and Black, the first edition. By the way, we're working on a second edition. Yay, I'm really excited about that. But when I wrote that book, one of the aspects of that book that I see now was unique was that I knew I had to put into the book some vocabulary, the vocabulary of gifted education, so that parents who have gifted children, no matter what their background is, but in particular, I was focused on the Black community. I want Black parents to know the language of the field. And so in the back of the book, I put a glossary. And I know that glossary is pretty unique, or was unique when we first published Bright, Talented, and Black 10 years ago. The uniqueness of the glossary is that we've given definitions that we would normally learn, in a gifted ed course or certification or in training that the educators would learn. But I want parents of these students to know the language so that when they sit at the table, they can have conversations across the table, and the families don't feel as if somebody's speaking a foreign language to them. They have the capacity to understand the language. They just need to know what the language is. They need to be able to understand, the difference between achievement tests and ability tests and IQ tests. They need to understand all the different types of service options that school systems can and should be investing in order to help their children excel. They need to understand what the gifted traits are, the psychological, the social emotional gifted traits. We need to be able to teach them about Dabrowski's theories. We need to tell families that we know that their children are intense, and we understand why, because the research has told us about intensities in gifted students, and this just makes them feel so much better. So when I do parent workshops, I've had parents come up to me and say, you must be in my living room tonight. I felt like you were in my living room, that you were at the table, you were talking to, because you know my kids. How did you know my kids so well, Dr. Joy? And I say, well, this is what we know about giftedness, and we know that your children, you're here because you believe, or someone has said to you, your child qualifies, or you believe that you want to know if your child qualifies. And so the language of the field is critically important. Reaching into the community to get leadership, parents, as well as community leaders, to sit at that table as we make important decisions about services, as we look for more support from our administration, from the city council, from people who make those funding decisions, from the state. We need parents who are representative of all cultural backgrounds to be a part of that advocacy team. One of the reasons why we're having so much difficulty in gifted education today to sustain programs is because our programs lack equity. They lack the face, the lives, the experiences of people of color. And so when administrators start looking across and somebody says your program is we've been watching your program and your programming is inequitable, where are all the Black kids, where are all the brown kids, and you don't have any students there, you don't have anybody to represent and say, well, we're working on this. Then when it comes time for budget time comes around, or it comes time for us to make new decisions about equity, these programs are being attacked. They're being attacked. And in many cases, Randy, rightfully so, because they lack equity, and you cannot continue to have public programming and allow our programs to appear as if they're private. So, the old saying, people would say that gifted education is private education at public expense. We need to get rid of that whole idea about what gifted education is. And if we're going to support equity, then we want to make sure that our programs are equitable all the way down to the advisory councils. Parents need to be on that council. Community leaders need to be on that council. And I've had people say, well, I tried one family, and that family, and I said, well, talk to somebody else. Let somebody else in the community speak on their behalf. Let that person bring parents in and train them. Gifted 101. Why not? Train them what Gifted 101 is, and then they can go into their communities and they can be the trainers. Use the trainer model with parents and community leaders at the helm. We have to stop underestimating the intellectual capacity of Black and brown families. There is nothing anywhere that says that Black people are any less intelligent. As a matter of fact, Martin Jenkins' studies and his publications, along with Paul Whitty, when he was a young student at Northwestern many years ago, 1934, he found a little girl through a talent search process who ended up with an IQ of 200. This little girl, they use the same battery of tests that Terman used on his termites. That's another whole conversation.
Oh, yeah.
That he used. And they used the same battery of tests and found this little girl to have a measured IQ of 200. And then there were other students that they've located after that talent search. It was very intentional. They intentionally went into the Black community to find giftedness. So that talent search process yielded great results. They wrote about it, they published it. Being Black and gifted is nothing new.
Nope.
What has to happen is that we have to look at these children differently. We have to believe our belief systems and our behaviors have to change towards these students and their families and their communities too. Certainly there's all kinds of issues in communities and families of all persuasions, of all income groups. We have a drug culture, we have crime that cuts across all cultural groups. But that doesn't mean that those parents and those community members don't care about their kids, that they shouldn't be at the table. We should be ashamed of ourselves in 2020 of having any advisory council for gifted education that does not have a demographic representation the same as our community. You know, that's one of the places to look at. What does your advisory committee, your advisory council look like? Or do you have two councils? You have one for this and one for that. You know, we can't keep doing backdoor politics with gifted education and think these programs are going to survive. They're not going to survive, Randy, and folks that are listening. They're not going to survive. And if we want them to survive, they have to be equitable, accessible, and they have to be demographically representative. There's really no excuse for it not to be, except that we don't have a belief system. And we insist that gifted means something other than what I've spent my whole life learning about. You know, I've lived it. I know what it is. I've seen it in many different ways. And I'm continuing to see and to speak to parents. And they write me at night. They text me. They inbox me. They send me stories of these amazing kids. And yet, in some cases, we're still unwilling to change the way we've done things in order to make things different. And I think we have a major job to do. And go ahead, Andy.
No, I think you make a great point. I think it's, you know, we do have a big job to do, and I think there is a lot more that needs done systemically. And I think you mentioned stuff. You mentioned in your kind of brief that you sent us that, you know, culturally responsive curriculum, and like. And I did pose a question. So what should be included in teacher education programs to help shift educators' mind? Because I do think when you rely on teacher referrals to make a lot of the identifications for giftedness, and teachers aren't educated in culturally responsive curriculum, and the majority of teachers are not teachers of color, you end up with a whitewashed gifted program. And you end up, and I think a lot of times, and I can attest this myself, I think we look at our data and we see there's a problem, so we make strides, and we feel like those little strides are great. But I think I have to continually go back to my data and be really honest with myself and be really critical and say, I've made some gains, they're not enough. I have to keep doing. I have to find more, and I have to find something that works better. So, and I know that culturally responsive curriculum, it's something that has been written about in several books by several different authors, and why I can't think of her name right now. She's a candidate for that people are kind of pushing forward for Secretary of Ed. And why her name escapes me right now, but she wrote
Gloria Ladson-Billings.
What was it?
About, is it Gloria Ladson-Billings or no? Her name just escaped me as well. I knew you're talking about.
Yes. Okay.
I don't think she wants the job, but yeah. Yeah.
That's a tough job. You just throw somebody into that. But anyway, it's something we say a lot, right? We say culturally responsive curriculum. And I think educators who are in practice right now probably need support with that. Absolutely. Is there something we can do in teacher education programs
Absolutely.
as well? So I know you mentioned it, so I wanted to give you some time to talk about that, but I also know you have another couple slides. So I want to give you the opportunity to kind of wrap up what you have to share and also maybe touch on that culturally responsive curriculum piece.
Mm-hmm. So these are some must-haves that I developed just to kind of wrap this up tonight with you all. Um, Beyond the culturally responsive curricular training, we also need to start out with mandatory anti-racist training, and we can do that in stages. You can't do it all at once. You shouldn't expect that a group of people who have been practicing racism and discriminatory behaviors throughout their careers or living it in their lives to change in one half day session from being a racist to being an anti-racist. It's not going to happen. Or reading a couple of books. It's just not going to happen. And so we offer to the field. We say anti-racist training is a must-have. And that would help people to understand, first of all, where are they complicit in all of these discriminatory behaviors. What kinds of implicit biases do they have? Explicit biases do they have? What kind of microaggressions do they use in daily conversation that affect and impact the young people? Just standing before a group of students and saying things to them that are racist in nature and expecting that it not bother those young people, that's a problem. So we do have to engage the field, the individuals in gifted education in anti-racist training. It's critical that we also, we merge that with culturally responsive curricular training and, of course, gifted education. So all together, we can provide them with a more substantive training model that would help us to address this issue of equity. Early and sustained access, you said that already. And then the mandatory curricular responsive training for teachers, administrators, counselors, everyone who is in our schools and every school in America by now or should be planning for culturally responsive training. And you're right. There are a number of people who have written about this since as far back as the 1980s. We have grounded material, grounded research, great books. And I mentioned Ladson Billings because her book, The Dream Keepers, is a classic in the field. And she was one of the early trainers, early leaders, early persons who spoke about culturally responsive training, culturally responsive curriculum. The pedagogies that we use in our training were developed by Ladson Billings, Geneva Gay, and a few other people who continue to use that in their work. But gifted education, once again, we've set ourselves apart and believe that while general ed may need to have culturally responsive training, we don't have to do it because we're gifted education. Well, I got news for gifted education. And I have a number of scholarly colleagues that would support me in this. We need culturally responsive understandings for everyone and anyone who's working with gifted kids or looking to locate gifted kids or working who are guiding them, who are counseling them, who are running our schools, running these schools. Everyone needs to understand the pedagogy of culturally responsive teaching. We need to reframe gifted education and advanced program, the identification and the service models. We're hearing more and more about people using local norms, and it's not new. It's just that people weren't talking about it. The educators weren't talking about it as much. We are having people have conversation about the use of universal screening, and then we're hearing people say, well, universal screening is too costly. It's too expensive. We can't do it in our school district once a year or with two different grade levels because our district is very, very large. Well, then that means we need to reallocate our funds. So when we do this reframing, we need to reallocate funds. If we are really serious about finding those bright students in all population groups at these particular grade levels, we need to reallocate funds so that we can use universal screening to cast a wider net. And as I mentioned earlier, and I can't say this enough, another must have is improve parent and family engagement and collaborations. It is critical. That is also part of our culturally responsive training, that educators who don't understand, as you mentioned earlier, who are not a part of these population groups that we are underserving, they don't understand and don't know these families. A part of that training should also be that they get to know families, and educators have better relationships with these families. um, Again, this is comprehensive. It's not there's no one size fits all, because some of our districts may be at one point with one of these areas and some may be at another point. But we definitely need to engage in culturally responsive teaching, where we ensure that the cultural groups that are represented in the classroom, that we are teaching from their perspective. We're using materials that include individuals from their groups. We're using representative literature. Again, there's no excuse for it any longer that we have libraries that don't have books that are representative of all cultural groups. There's really no excuse for that, because there are just, I mean, several years ago, the American Library Association started a campaign called We Need Diverse Books. And we have seen a great increase in persons writing books for children, chapter books, picture books for children, to help lift their self-esteem and help them see themselves, in literature. And the same with the content materials. That if we have textbooks that we're teaching from, or we're not including the cultural backgrounds of all individuals, and that our books are loaded with the white Eurocentric viewpoint of the world, then we're doing something wrong. We need to look at those books and see to it, that all cultural groups are represented in the materials that we use. And if we don't understand those materials, that's where that training comes in. It's not as if we can hold one session, check it off, and say we've done culturally responsive training. You can't do it like that anymore. We have to make sure that this training takes a deeper look at cultural groups, that it recognizes the values, the norms, the practices, the history, and recognize even the histories of these cultural groups, my own included, where that people don't want to talk about the real, true history of the scourge of slavery on this country, on the culture of people from African nations. And then those individuals who also from the Latino backgrounds, what is the government, what kinds of things are happening, because that are still causing challenges and inequities to exist in our culture and in our communities. These students that we work with, they recognize all of these challenges, and they have questions about it. They have questions. They have questions about the hypocritical behaviors and the hypocrisy in the materials that they are being taught from. They have questions. And if we listen, we'll hear them state their own questions and concerns. And then if you don't listen, some of them are going to speak up anyway. And I'm grateful, every time I hear about a kid who spoke up and said, this is wrong. I came across several months ago, I was speaking to a parent in a district here in Virginia. And over a few weeks, I found out that her little girl, and I could say her name out loud now because she was honored as one of the 5 top, what they call the Kid of the Year award, that was given by Time and Nickelodeon. And just last week, this little girl's name is Bellin the Bee. That's her handle on Twitter. And Bellin, actually in her classroom one day, and as students were passing around crayons, somebody asked to pass the flesh colored crayon around out. And Bellin, after having been in school for a few years, not that long, she was only 10 years old at the time, recognized that there was something wrong with the flesh colored crayon being peach, because she wasn't peach, and her family members were all different shades. And it bothered her. And so Bella went home with her mom, and they had this conversation about the fact that flesh colored crayons had to be more than peach. So this little girl sought out, and she actually accomplished it. She sought out to create an entire range of colors in crayons that represented people from the African American culture. And she's changed the names of the crayons, and I would advise you, if you don't know Belen, just check her out on Twitter at Belen the Bee, at Belen the Bee, BELLENTHEBEE. So she is one of my sheroes. I am so excited to have had a chance to follow this young lady and her work, and the awards that she is now receiving, national awards. Just the recognition that people are sharing with Belen because of her insight for a 10-year-old to say that we can do better. We can need more crayons, Crayola, whoever's making these crayons, we need more crayons that represent other children, other people in the culture. And she holds the crayon to her hand. She said it didn't look like her, but when she was expected to color a picture of herself as the flesh colored crayon, not to suggest that there aren't other crayons in the box, but that flesh colored crayon was peach. And Belen says, I'm more than peach. And she was so right. And of course, I had to order the package of her crayons and sketch pads. And I shared them with my grandchildren, my 7-year-old. And he was so excited. He pulled out one of the crayons out of the box, and he said, Nana, this looks just like Dad. And it brought tears to my eyes. And I said, this is exactly what Belen was seeking to do. Nana, this crayon looks just like Dad. His father's that's my son. He's a darker tone in skin than Dylan is. But that's exactly, and I wrote to Belen right away, and I told her, she was so excited that my grandson responded the same way that she responded to the need to have these crayons in this box when we talk about flesh color. So these students are watching us, they're listening to us, they're looking at everything we're doing or not doing. They recognize the inequities. They know that we can and we should be doing better. They're speaking up. They're becoming better and stronger advocates for other children like themselves. And so it's our responsibility to get this right. It really is. It's our responsibility to get this right. We again, I say we don't have any choice.
No, and the crayon analogy is great to show that representation really is important. It's not just about the crayon or the Band-Aid. You have a Band-Aid on my finger right now, and it matches me pretty well, but it wouldn't match everybody. So we talk about that.
Right.
Seems little, it's Band-Aids, it's crayons, but representation is so important, and feeling like you're part of something. I mean, representation is lacking in what you're taught in school and how you're taught in school. You feel separate from, and I think that sense of belonging is super important to make sure that our schools feel like communities for everybody and places where everybody can learn and grow. And I think you made so many great points, and I want to make sure you share your last slide, because I think that's also important too. I think you have your books listed on there, and I think you also have some contact information there. I'd like to make sure we get shared before we wrap up the day. So
okay. Yeah, so a great piece that myself and a few colleagues, Donna Ford, James Moore, and Aaron Floyd, worked on together, a piece around being Black and gifted in rural America, another population that we've not spent a lot of time talking about. When we think about rural America, we think primarily of white rural America, and we forget that Black students live in the rural areas as well. And many of them are gifted, and there are some barriers, and yet also some facilitators, we believe. So we're real excited. We're pleased that piece came out recently. And then I'm involved in 3 different books coming up, and I am super, super duper excited, super duper duper busy, but super excited about each one of these, with Matt Fugate, Wendy Behrens, and Cecilia Boswell, as well as with a number of authors, colleagues who are experts across culturally responsive teaching, I'm working with Deb Douglas, who has a great book out about self-advocacy. And so we've engaged a number of experts to talk about self-advocacy strategies from the perspective of Black students, Latino students, twice exceptional students, Native American students. We're very, very excited. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I'm so pleased that Gifted Unlimited has asked, and I'm now working on the second edition of Bright, Talented, and Black, but this time with an educator supplement. So again, I've engaged a number of colleagues, and we're talking in this book all about Black gifted kids, their families, all the issues, the concerns, and we're providing in the supplement strategies for educators. So we couldn't be more excited to work with so many wonderful people in this work. And I encourage you, when these books come out, that you get a copy of each of them, and then please stay in touch with me if you would. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I don't know if I can have any more Facebook friends though, but I am on Facebook. But do follow me on Twitter. We have some pretty interesting conversations on Twitter, and I believe substantive conversations. And I do have a website there. And of course, if you want to email me at any time, that's perfectly okay with me. I'll respond to you as quickly as I can, and I will be glad to answer your individual questions or to come out and help you. I'm actually going to be working with Jefferson County early next year, on Mental Health Day, to have a conversation about mental health issues and gifted children. So I'm very, very excited about that. But thank you all for listening. Thank you so much, Randy, for reaching out, and Nanette for engaging me in this conversation tonight. I hope it was helpful to you.
It was, and we have lots of questions on here about, will this be available later? Can we go back and watch this later? And I want to clarify that, yes, absolutely, this has been recorded. Once it gets recorded, it takes me a little bit of time this evening to get it uploaded, and I get the link off, and we get it posted to YouTube and then to our website, coloradogifted.org. So you can absolutely access this and those resources later. That data is, and that those must-haves are great little slides that you can absolutely share with your administrators to share your concerns about equity in our gifted programs and in our schools. Joy is a excellent resource. Go to her website. Absolutely recommend following her and Donna Ford and Colin Seal on Twitter. I feel like there's been several conversations and threads I've followed on Twitter between the three of you. We do have next week coming up Gil Whiting, and he is the Director of Graduate Studies in Department of African American Studies at Vanderbilt University. And he is talking about addressing the elephant, missing and unmotivated gifted children. And he will talk about historical and contemporary beliefs, policies, and practices that lead to inequality in gifted programs. So if you liked what we talked about tonight, a great follow-up will be next week with another perspective. So I loved what you had to share with us tonight, Joy, and I took quite a few notes and came away with quite a few things that I can do to improve my practices. So I appreciate that. And I think if anything we can take away is that we can always strive to do better. So folks, please rewatch this, watch it again. If you missed some, go to our website and find the link tomorrow to watch Joy's presentation again. Joy, thank you so much for joining us this evening and taking time out of your busy schedule.
You're welcome.
You've got lots of writing to do, so we'll let you go. And folks, same time, same place next week. See Gil.